Hello, I hope you are doing well. I'm going to be presenting my final project today on the dependency ratio as a concept, and I'm going to be using labor force survey data from Statistics Canada in order to do so. So let's go over a summary of what I'm going to talk about today before we get right into it. First of all, I'm going to present my research question. Then I'm going to give some more context about dependency ratios, what they are and why they are important. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the data set, followed by presentation of my analyses and visualizations, and then bring it all together at the end with a conclusion of results. So, my topic for today, my general topic, is the economy. My research question, more specifically, is: are dependency ratios an accurate representation of the tax burden on working people? Now, just a little bit of context for why I chose this research question. I had heard about and done some work with dependency ratios in the past, and I recently, my research interests had caused me to become more interested in them, so I had done some more reading, and I stumbled upon an article by Doug Orr. I believe it was from 2005. I'll link it in the slides here below. And he was arguing that the concept of the dependency ratio, let me slide over here. The concept of the dependency ratio is too simplistic, he said. He said when we just use age, when we have the sum of all dependents defined by their age being below 15 or 65 and older divided by the sum of all working people, he said it's not an accurate representation of the picture. And he said when we're using this, we're actually overestimating how many dependents there are going to be. And that really got me curious because I hadn't heard much criticism or critique of the ratio before. So when this project came along, I thought it would be a great opportunity to sort of explore it a little bit more. And that's what I'm going to be doing here. I'm not going to be doing any really complex analysis, but I just want to take a look at the data and see if there does appear to be a difference. So I'm going to be working with the definition on the left. This is the most common one. There is another definition that is used by Statistics Canada. I actually am not sure why they go with the ages 0 through 19 for younger dependents. But since I haven't read many things using it, I actually was quite surprised. I only saw it offhand one time. I'm going to be working with the more common one on the left side of the screen here. So why do dependency ratios matter? They're important because they're used to inform policy decisions, often about healthcare or education, and they're a really valuable tool just to get a high-level understanding of the breakdown of a population. In an economic sense, they're used to estimate the tax burden on the working population. So you can imagine here when we read that, you can start to think why Doug Orr, the researcher that I mentioned before, why he would maybe argue that it might be a bit too simplistic. With Canada's aging population, it's a really relevant time to be looking at the dependency ratio because we want to be making the correct decisions and we need to be informed with the right data and the right interpretations of that data in order to do so. As I'm sure you know or you can imagine, populations with a large proportion of older adults have unique care needs and unique infrastructure needs, which means the community, the city, or the province or a whole country has to adjust to that. So that's kind of why this is such a relevant and important topic now. And I fully expect that it will be something we're hearing about more frequently in the mainstream media in the next few years. The data set that I'm going to be using to look at this is the Labor Force Survey. Now, the Labor Force Survey is one of Statistics Canada's two main surveys. It's the LFS, Labor Force Survey, and the census. The LFS runs monthly, so we're always getting in new data on a monthly basis. It has a very large sample size, 56,000 households per month, and it is collected on a household level. So the way that works is one person from each household that's selected will receive their invitation. It will be an invitation to participate either through a phone interview, an in-person interview, or an electronic questionnaire. And once they participate, this is also one of the only 2 mandatory surveys to participate in from Statistics Canada. Once they participate, they'll start off by filling out kind of a roster about all of their household members. So they'll list how many members there are and give some basic demographic information for each of these members. And then once that portion is completed, they will go on to the main section. And that main section will ask questions about employment, economic standing, education, things like that for all of the household members who are aged 15 or older. So it's a really great data set, super important for economics in Canada. It's some would argue more important than the census. So I'm glad to be able to have worked with it on this project. And let's get into the analyses. So the first thing that I did once I had my data was I created a pivot table and then from there a pivot chart. So this just helped me to visualize the data, and it was using 2 of my key indicators, namely province and age. So I wanted to get a good idea of what the distribution was. And we can see, let's go to Ontario because that's where I live. The largest age category is 70 and up, which makes complete sense because all of the other categories are 4-year increments, and this one does not have an upper limit. You'll also notice that the first category is ages 15 through 19. That's because the Labor Force Survey does not collect data on children. And so for the purposes of this analysis, we'll just be using the difference between working age population and adults 65 and older. Now, if I was looking to create actual dependency ratios to find out what the actual ratio was for each province, then this would be a problem. It wouldn't be adequate data. But since what I want to do is compare 2 different measures, age and employment, it'll be fine because we don't need the actual numbers. We just want to see what the difference looks like. So after we had looked at this in Excel, I went over to Jupyter Notebooks. I imported my libraries and imported my data, and then wanted to take a look at my data. You'll see a lot of NaN variables. That would be a problem if I was going to use any of these columns, but I didn't end up needing any of them, so I just left them as it is. I didn't need to do any transformations on those. Where I did do some data manipulation was to create 2 new columns. So I had a column called LFS stat, which is basically employment status, but it had 4 categories. You can see here I included them: employed, at work or away from work, unemployed, or not in the labor force. So the difference between unemployed and not in labor force is unemployed implies they're looking for work. And I just wanted the difference between employed and unemployed. I didn't care about the different distinctions. So that's what I created here, a new one called employment status. I also created another column called older, and I just wanted to distinguish between people who were 65 and above or who were 64 or younger, because that will allow me to distinguish between working age and presumed non-working age. So then I wanted to print the 4 variables that I'll be using the most, and it looks like it worked, so I went ahead and went on to create my visualizations. Now, I created 2 visualizations to show the data that I'll be examining for the analysis. The first one is looking at employment status by province and looking at the number of employed versus unemployed people. And you can see here, it looks to be somewhat close with, looks like slightly more employed people than unemployed. The second graph, second visualization was a similar idea, but this time with the age groups. So we've got people older than 65 and 64 or younger. And here there's a bit of a more visible distinction. So it's pretty clear that there are a lot more people younger than 65 in each of these categories, which in the context of our research question of is it relevant to try to expand the dependency ratio, this is important because I just wanted to get a first glance before I created some more visualizations, and even so, this is showing me something really important because it's saying, yeah, if we're just looking at the number of people based on their age who we presume will need to support unemployed people, it looks like there are a lot more people who are of working age than there really are, because when we go to here, it's not a one-to-one. If you're under 65, you're working. If you're over 65, you're not. We can see that there is a clear difference in the distribution here. So once I had established that, I exported the data because I had, of course, created those two new columns, which I wanted to continue using. And then I moved into Tableau. Now in Tableau, what I've created is a dashboard that just summarizes the most relevant information. So we've got two donut charts, a map, a slicer, and two tree maps. And what we can do here is we can look by province, but we're going to start by just looking at the country overall. So age breakdown, 65 and up and unemployed, both on the left side, 65 or 64 or under, and employed both on the right side. So we're just going to remember when we're looking at this that for the dependency ratio to be low, we want the right side to be larger, which right now it is, but you can see there are a lot more people who are unemployed than there are people who are above 65. We also have marital status and education. This is more for interest's sake, just to kind of, once we go a little bit further, see that extra information about the distributions there, just as a secondary sort of topic. So let's look at Ontario again. We can see here there's quite a large difference. We've got 35% of the population is 65 or older, but we have 45% are unemployed, which again corroborates the hypothesis that the dependency ratio is too simplistic to actually capture the data that is needed to create good policy. And we can take a look here. Let's just look at unemployed people, because we want to see what are the characteristics of people who are making this classical definition of dependency ratio maybe not quite work as well as it was supposed to. So we can see unemployed people take up a large proportion of people who have at a maximum an elementary school education. Also a large proportion of people who only have some high school education. But there is also a good percentage of people who, that's maybe between a third and a quarter there, of the people with a bachelor's degree are unemployed. Of course, because this is very simplistic, we can't see how many of those people are retired or not looking for work, but it does give us a picture of who this group is. You can see less than half of the people who are married are unemployed. Also, slightly less than half single, never married. But people who are widowed are much more likely to be unemployed, which makes sense because typically people are widowed when they're older and when you would expect to see them retire. So one interesting thing to look at as well is we can see here in Quebec, just pursuing the secondary analysis, people living in Quebec are more likely to be living common law, which as soon as this will finish loading, there we go. We can see in Quebec, we've got a large proportion of people living common law, whereas we've taken it off and go back to just the country overall, it jumps down to the third below single and married. And Quebec is unique in that way, actually. That's another topic that would be interesting to pursue. But some demographers actually believe that that's a trend that we may see expanding to the rest of Canada. So it will be interesting to see in the next couple decades if that becomes true, if Canada as a whole will begin to see people choosing to live common law, not just as a precursor to marriage, but as an alternative to marriage overall. Now, one other thing that I wanted to quickly point out here, we can see when we click on one of the sides, it gives us some information on the other one as well. So people 65 and older are more likely to be unemployed than they are to be employed. Only 8% of people who are 65 and older are employed. But there's still a large proportion, 20s are, let's see over here. A large proportion of people who are unemployed are still under 65. That's 17%. That's a sizable amount. And our data right here, at least with the analysis I've done on it, can't show us why these people are unemployed. This data is from February, so that's right at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Most of the layoffs didn't start happening until March, and some of the other readings I've seen have used February as the comparison month, so I wouldn't expect COVID to have had a huge impact on employment rates for this data set. So it looks like this is something that's, been kind of standard. Yeah, so this is the dashboard that I've put together. And yeah, it's pretty simple, but it gives us the information that we need to answer the question that we had raised, and it also gives us some additional information as well about marital status and education, which personally I find quite interesting, and I hope you do too. Okay, so just coming back to summarize, we've looked at the data, we have talked about what it means, talked about, I've given a brief overview of some of the literature around this area, and when I first started doing this project, I really was just curious because I read that article redefining the dependency ratio, and it was the first time that I'd even read something kind of questioning the use of the dependency ratio. And by no means am I an expert in the area. I've really only started being interested in it in the last year or so, and I have not done really extensive reading on it. So very well could be that I'm just missing some important sources, but it kind of got me thinking because I'd read so many other papers that, call it a super important source. So I was just interested, honestly, to see if there was a difference. And through this project, I definitely found that there is reason to question how reliable the dependency ratio is. So it's something that it's really piqued my interest now, and I hope to continue looking into it in the future. And I really hope that you've enjoyed this presentation and find it interesting as well, because it's certainly relevant for us as Canadians, not just on a theoretical level, but as I mentioned at the beginning, with the trends in our population going towards an aging population, it's a very important topic to be aware of, even if it doesn't impact our work directly. Definitely indirectly, we should recognize that this is an important demographic shift that is happening in our country right now. So that draws us to the end of this presentation. As I said, I really hope you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun working on it. It was very interesting to me. And I also wanted to say thank you for the semester. I hope you have a great few weeks off. before the summer semester. And thank you for teaching this year. Have a great day.